All right, man. I'm just cranking up here. Um, Legal man just got in, so we'll get everything kind of kicked off. Do a little bit of housekeeping. Play the intro. And, I'm going to introduce you guys to the Quash, man. If you guys haven't been introduced to him, um, he's a very interesting guy and a very sharp individual. And you guys know me; I'm a freaking caveman running around with hammers beating on shit. So it's I'll be a nice parrot. So anyway, let's play the intro for you guys real fast because we got to do the traditionals.
This is Sparta!
Hey, boys! Look what I got here!
Hey, where are the white women at?
All right, I'll tell you what. Let me add Legal Man in here, and we're just gonna go ahead and kick it off, man. You guys know we just kind of roll raw and dirty. So, Mr. Legal Man, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. For some folks in the chat that don't know, can you kind of give your 10,000 foot view, and what your mindset is about this whole constitutional legal situation?
Well, I mean, the problem was that I've practiced law for a long time, and the official narrative about the way the system works is just not true. And I've proved it again and again and again with shows and chats with the Chat GPT now, the AI. The construction of the document has multiple problems, and the fairy tales that people are told about it, they're just not true. And it's just a control system. The fundamental problems with it regarding consent, authority, all the structural issues with how it gets interpreted, none of those things can ever work with the document. And the problems that people are driven into are these sort of very superficial issues, trying to get everybody arguing with each other about liberals versus conservatives and fiscal conservatism and all this nonsense they make up that are mostly Barnum statements. And the vast majority of the people simply do not know. And the vast majority of the people out in media and academia are either completely and totally bamboozled, or they're in on the scam, and ultimately makes no difference which it is because they do the exact same harm either way.
Yeah, they're all working in the same system. Now, to just a little bit of backstory on some things, I was introduced to you off of the Safety Doc show, a show you did with him, and then looked you up on Twitter, and then started listening to your podcasts. And it's kind of funny the way when I do a show with somebody, I generally have an idea who I'm talking to, but I don't like to throw out questions and script a whole lot of stuff. I like it to be just a very fluid conversation. You notice when I talked to you on Twitter, I didn't tell you, hey, we're going to talk about this question, this question, this question. I wanted to kind of drill down on this whole Second Amendment argument that we get into sometimes, but I didn't try to pick your brain and see where you were at on firearms and all this to test everything. I'll ask some of that now. I don't know whether you're a firearms owner or particularly care about firearms or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I own firearms, but I'm not a so-called gun guy. I don't go out and shoot a bunch. I have stuff that's strictly for protection only, and beyond that, I don't do anything with them. And the issue with the Second Amendment is a classic case. They have created arguments that make no sense. They have you arguing about whether or not it's a military application test. This is just something that the Supreme Court dreamed up in the 1930s. There's nothing in there. In fact, I've done a Chat GPT which I don't think I put it out for the public or even in my Patreon, but I showed that the language they chose, shall not be infringed, is the strongest possible language. The computer couldn't come up with any stronger language. And yet still what we end up with is all these infringements and limitations. And the problem becomes that everybody starts arguing about whether or not it's sufficient for home defense and whether we need it for hunting and all those. None of those things matter. It says shall not be infringed. That's all. If you don't like that, which a lot of people don't, then you need to go and get a constitutional amendment. That's what the process is for. It's not so that the Supreme Court can step in. And, you know, once you get trapped in this box like the NRA, which is just controlled opposition, they're completely fine with all of the restrictions where you have to get a license and you have to register and you can only have certain kinds of weapons and all this other nonsense. There's a Supreme Court case back in the 19th century, Cruikshank, and in that the court's very clear that these so-called regulations that everybody loves and wants, and which is reasonable gun restrictions and all this other crap for safety purposes and all this other stuff, that's all left to the states. That's all. It's not like there's not a procedure. There is a procedure. If you're worried about people having guns for whatever reason, well, then you need to go to your state legislature and see what they can get. But of course, now all that's been all screwed up because Supreme Court has dreamed up this thing called the incorporation doctrine. And now they periodically incorporate anything they care to from the amendments into the states themselves, which is completely asinine. The states, under no circumstance, were passing laws to restrict what they could do. The restrictions on what the state can do are all in Article 1, Section 10, and the other places where it's expressly set out what states are not allowed to do. And these amendments, there's just another made up thing. And so, you know, if you listen to the Second Amendment arguments where nobody needs this big of a, you know, you don't need 30 bullets. You hear all, you don't need that big a round. You know, none of those are relevant. Those are all part of this argument they put people into. That's just simply not accurate. That's all. It has nothing to do with it. And once you're in that argument, you lose because you're going to get into what's reasonable and not reasonable and what's necessary. Once you're in that area, you're never going to win. And the state's always going to win.
That's part of, why I like talking to you and why I like following you, because you're able to lay out the scam and show the receipts on it. And what I want people to understand about me, because we've all come from different backgrounds about firearms and, the Second Amendment right. And which me and some other guys talked about it last night. That shall not language is like I said, it's the strongest legal language you can use. That means you absolutely can't.
Well, I mean, it's stronger than the First Amendment. The First Amendment says they shall make no law abridging. This one just says shall not be infringed. It doesn't even mention laws. It's beyond that. And so, again, it's just an absurdity to then concoct this huge array of laws and regulations and stipulations and everything else around it, and to pretend as though it's about defending yourself against criminals. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the people in such a situation were worried that the state would not allow them to defend themselves against criminals. That's idiotic. And everybody knows what the thing's for. It's to make sure that the government itself doesn't get too big. There's plenty of discussion about it by certain kinds of people in the so-called founding. But the problem is that the government has now basically outlawed discussing what it's really for.
Yes.
They try to turn you into basically a criminal for even to accurately describe what the stupid thing's for. And so, there's the feds are everywhere. They'll try to lure people into getting them to say crazy stuff. And, the people that fall into that, well, I honestly don't feel that bad for them. No violent armed kind of resistance to the government is going to work at this point anyway. It's a battle for hearts and minds. It doesn't mean that I'm in favor of these gun laws. I'm not. There shouldn't be any of them. But I'm not concerned about citizens. Citizens aren't the ones who are going to come take my rights. There's only one entity that does that, and that's the government. And that's it's just a silly thing.
That will kick in your front door, shoot your dog, your wife, maybe your kid, and then put you through court for it. And
Sure.
then you might get lucky. You might get lucky, and somehow you also don't go to prison behind it.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is the problem with the state. And so, you know, the Second Amendment is another classic example of the way the structure of the system that we're told exists can never work. And that is that the government decides what the government can do.
Yeah.
As soon as you have a system like that, it's over. And the idea of checks and balances, that's a fantasy. The checks and balances are a fantasy. It's like saying that I've set up checks and balances inside of my own family, and that my wife tells me what to do, and that she lets me know whether I have the authority to do it. And we just go into cahoots to decide whether or not she should tell me if I have authority or not. And
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense, and it's not the law, and nobody would have agreed to it. And it's easy to prove because there's not one speck of discussion about the idea that the court, when it rules, would somehow be the law of the land.
Mhm.
That is a phenomenally gigantic power. And if such an absurd power was going to be given to the federal government, there would have been a massive amount of discussion about it. But there's literally no discussion in any form or fashion. And the so-called Federalist Papers, or in the phony baloney notes from the Constitutional Convention, there's just nothing there. And so again, the problem is the fundamental construct and the way it supposedly fits together. It's just not true. And so it gets abused and misused.
Yeah, and it completely gets turned around. And that's, I want people to understand some of these things. The government will just make the rules up as they go. They'll redefine a word. They'll change a definition. They'll do anything. They will have prosecutors walk into a courtroom knowing they've got a friendly judge who is basically within their leanings, and they can completely make stuff up out of whole cloth.
Well, that's what the supposed system's about, that you're supposedly have these checks and balances. The problem is that everybody involved in the system, from the prosecutor to the judge to the cops to the appellate courts, they all work for the exact same employer.
Yeah.
And so that's just a direct conflict of interest. In the law, conflicts of interest are very well recognized and worked out. Mm-hmm. And you can't have a conflict of interest like that. But they do. There's all these exceptions for government. And so once the people allow that kind of thing and then run around, as I hear all the time, talking about how it's a brilliant system, the greatest system ever designed, this is just serious brainwashing. That's all. It's just very, very serious brainwashing. And you can't do anything about brainwashing. And because I don't have ability to brainwash people. And so they mandate school curriculums. They brainwash you night and day in the media. They brainwash you with government. They brainwash you through these academic institutions and all the phony baloney stuff they put out. And so it doesn't ultimately matter. They can just kookify anybody. And that's just the situation we're in.
We're in that situation for plenty of things throughout the whole spectrum of society right now. The firearm stuff, really, I think when it really started to interest me, I went through a period of my life, man. I was in some shit. I got caught a felony, went to prison, gave up all those rights, and then spent many years before I got them back. And I don't know whether that kind of triggered that interest in me to look and see how these laws were actually working, or who was pulling the strings behind them. It probably had something to do with it, because I wanted to learn more about this so-called right that I, gave up and then had to go through another court thing to get back.
Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't give it up. That's not even accurate. See, I mean, this is the fact that the language is used as a weapon. Mm-hmm. It was taken from you. You didn't give it up. It was taken from you. And the idea that you can lose rights to the government by simply violating a law that the government makes up means that you have no rights, because they can pass any kind of law they want. They could there's nothing that prevents them from taking your so-called right to have firearms for violation of a misdemeanor. There's nothing that stops it. It's just they haven't written it into the law. That's all. It's just a made up thing. And so they can take it for any reason they want if they claim the right to take it. And so the absurdity of taking your right away because you violated a government statute is absurd. They do the same thing with a vote. which I think is even funnier to me. That you
Yeah.
somehow give up your right to vote and sit on juries in most places when you so-called commit a felony and get convicted. So I lose my right to have any say in the government because I violated a law the government made up and convicted me of. It doesn't make any sense at all. And so yet the people run around and act like, well, he gave it up. It's like, well, he didn't give it up. It was taken from him. And there's literally no logical basis. In fact, it's the height of absurdity to say that the government can convict you and then you no longer have a say in the government.
Yeah.
Well, they can just limit down who they want to have a say in the government.
Oh, then
It's
they
just
whittle it
asinine.
down nicely.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
just asinine. But
that's
again, it's just a classic example of every single issue comes down to this same kind of absurdity, this kind of standing on its head absurdity. And they've gotten everybody brainwashed into believing that you're a patriot. You got to be a patriot. You got to support law and order and the Constitution, all this made up things that nobody can even tell you what any of it means. Nobody can even agree what the Constitution says. The court itself can't. The justices sitting up there can't agree on what a single case. They can't even agree. It's almost never unanimous. And even when it's so-called unanimous, there's almost always partially concurring and partially dissenting opinions where they accept out that they agree with the outcome, but they have different reasons. And so the idea that anybody could tell you what that Constitution means is a fantasy. It's a total fantasy.
That's where, we've hit it some on Twitter, and me and a lot of the guys that follow me and we've done shows together have all talked about it. If the Constitution had any teeth, it wouldn't matter what someone's ideology was when they were sitting on a court. They would be restrained by that text.
Well, you wouldn't even know anybody in the court because you're not bound by any opinions of the court because you're not a party to the case. They can only bind parties to the case. The Supreme Court knows this. So nobody would even know who any of these judges are. Nobody would know any of these cases because they wouldn't affect anybody but the parties to the case. And almost nobody's ever been a party to the case. But of course, no different than all political people. If voting actually mattered inside of a system with a constitution where you have equal rights, equal protection, the government's limited and all this crap, they wouldn't care who got elected because they would have such a limited ability to do anything. Just like it wouldn't matter who got on the court. It wouldn't matter because they'd be following the so-called law. But
let me
doesn't work.
Let me show a clip real fast. Now this is a legislator from Alabama. And I think he screws around and says the quiet part out loud for just a second. And him just saying this, I already know all of our national politicians and everybody else is going to screw us the same way. But let me pull this up. You might get a kick out of this one, man. Let me see. Let me pull this up. Because, man, I lost my notes on this, and I had to listen to this almost this entire session again to find it. And it's just a real quick thing, but here we go. Let me make sure. Yeah, that's sharing over. Okay. But yeah, get a kick out of this real fast.
Right. I understand what the retailers and the distributors feel about this, but just another additional layer of protection to me, it's just all the better.
That's right.
And man, I just applaud you for doing the right thing.
Well, thank you.
Sometimes it's tough
Just a second. I thought I had it set closer.
We stand up against opposition sometimes.
Right.
I have my own personal reason.
That's right.
I don't really want to share it in here, but I have my own personal reason of why I think this is a good bill. And it's a good extra layer of protection.
They just drone.
And when I hear people talk about the bill's not constitutional, we pass unconstitutional legislation in this body all the time.
Oh, that's great. What class was that? I mean, it's just so preposterous, right? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. They know the statement makes no sense anyway, right? When the people say that's unconstitutional, they can't do that. Okay, so what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It means you think it's unconstitutional. What is the effect? It's no effect. Is there any consequence? No, there's no consequence. And so
No.
it's just a meaningless statement to say.
He goes on to say there, and that in the next little part of that clip, that yeah, we passed this unconstitutional stuff, and then we sent it to the judiciary, and the judiciary is who needs to deal with whether it's constitutional or not.
Right. Well, there you go. Say the people, they have no idea what the construction is because they've been so bamboozled for 250 years, you know.
And these idiot lawmakers, rulers, I call them all the time, that are up here in our federal end of this thing. I mean, I read their bills and stuff all the time. I watch their stupid ass hearings. And it's just, they know everything that they do. It's just, they know they can just get away with whatever they want. And if they pass something like the Second Amendment stuff, they pass a gun law, they know they can arrest your ass for that gun law. They're going to put you through court cases for that gun law. They're going to put you in prison for that gun law. And while you fight, losing your life and losing your wealth to try to fight the government on that unconstitutional law, they're just out writing another law and putting another poor bastard in jail.
Of course. And people tell me it's the greatest system ever invented. It's beyond moronic. You know, you can't help people who are this brainwashed. They're for the most part, they're just way, way, way too far gone. So
yeah,
it's just kind of the way it is. You know, it's a battle for hearts and minds, and the minds we're trying to reach, they're so brainwashed, and tons of people are just so damn stupid and poisoned, can't think straight. We're never going to be able to reach any of them. That's all.
No. If there were enough people in the state of Alabama who were actually paying attention and were actually, you know, wanting their government to function as a government should and not as this overseeing all powerful thing, the minute that guy said on that, and that was in the House, I think, the minute he sat up there in the House and said that, they just would have walked in that building, walked him right out of that building, and he'd have been gone. See you.
But so they can't do that. There's no way to do anything like that. So you can't, because you've got armed government soldiers calling themselves police who will protect these people. And the reality is that that guy probably comes from a district where he's probably untouchable. And it really doesn't matter what he says. The people there are going to reelect him. And this is another fundamental structural problem with the system. People want to talk about, oh, we got to do this for America, or good for the America. No politician cares about that. He cares about being reelected. So the incentive is to be as corrupt as you possibly can, to bring back as much pork as you can to your district, to hand out favors, to raise money, to get reelected. And that's what they're all doing up there, all just a pack of wolves fighting over a carcass, trying to grow the carcass and get as much as they can and carry back. That's it. And all this other stuff about integrity, that doesn't matter. These people care about one thing, that's getting reelected. Because while they're elected, they're in power, then they can pad their own nest. That's it. And so all these discussions about getting people of integrity and call them, no, it doesn't matter. If you don't live in their district and you can't vote in their district, and if their district is a locked up district, there's nothing you can do or say to them. There's nothing you can do. If they're corrupt enough, then they can just buy the votes and that's it. It's over. And so the system is absurd. The idea that people can vote to take stuff from other people. As soon as you allow a government to take taxes from people without their consent, it's over, because they will just simply dice and slice the population in a manner that makes sure that I'm taking it from you. You're complaining about me, but you're getting it from somebody else. And if you dice it up enough, then all we do is take it from the small group of people. And anybody can look at the income tax system and see who pays. The top 25% are paying it all. The 25 to 50% quartile pays a small amount, but the bottom half doesn't pay anything in income tax at all. And so there's absolutely no way to change that, because you're only 25% of the population. So how are you ever going to win? You can't. How are you going to stop it? You can't. No. And see, that's how you can know that it's constitutionally and totally laughable that there's equal protection or any of these kinds of taxes are legitimate, because absolutely nothing stops them. People don't know this, but back in the 1950s, tax rates at the top rates were in the 90%, up in the 90s. And so how do you stop that? When they purport to have the authority to tax you at any rate they care to, on any item they care to, at any amount they care to, and then spend it on anything they want to, You can't win that fight. There's no way to win that. And there's no moral ground to ever possibly make that legitimate. And so everything goes out the window as soon as you allow this involuntary taxation. As soon as you allow that, it's over, because they'll simply take the money and spend it on the men with the guns, spending it in ways to get reelected. That's it. You can never win. That can never be allowed. The Articles Confederation had a check on that. The federal government didn't have the authority to take any taxes like that. All they could do is ask the states for money. That's it. They asked the states, and then the states had to raise the money. So if the states didn't think they were doing a good job, the states just didn't give them any of the money. It's like the program died. Yeah, they voted for it, but the way the federal government was doing it, screw it, this is crap. They just stopped funding it. It's over. It's it. You can't do anything. And you have to have those kinds of checks and balances. Those are what real checks and balances look like. The federal government has no checks and balances except an imaginary set of Chinese walls.
Yeah. And I mean, it's where we look at things the way a lot of this has progressed. Okay. The 1800s case, the Crookshanks case, if I'm remembering right, wasn't that a firearms case out of Georgia? And then it went to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court said, we're the federal government. We have no say-so in that. You figure it out.
Yeah, it wasn't so much they said we have no say-so in it, but they said that, look, if you want these kinds of protections, you have to look to the state government for them. It's not that they have no say in the case. They had a say in the case, otherwise they wouldn't take it. But it was basically kind of a civil rights-ish case. Yeah. And but the facts were completely outrageous. But yes, the Supreme Court used to know, and they used to have all sorts of opinions like that. And they just made it very clear that you have to look to the state, not to the federal government, for this kind of relief. That's all. Mm-hmm. You don't like it, then you got to do that. The federal government has no say in the matter. They don't have any ability to legislate. As soon as you get away from there's no authority to do it, and you're arguing about whether they should do it, if it's a good idea, it's a policy, whether we're talking about safety or protection or whether we should spend the money, you've lost, because there's absolutely no chance you can ever win over time, because the only way a compromise like that will ever work over time is for the government's power to increase. It's impossible that it won't, because if I say they have no authority to do it, and the federal government on the other side, the liberals in there, these commies, or these people who just want to steal my shit, if they say, well, we do think they do and we should spend some, well, how do we compromise that? There's only one way to so-called compromise that. That's for me to give up and let them have some of the so-called power or money they say. That's it. That's the only way to compromise it. Otherwise, because my position is they have no authority to get any. Yeah. So that's why they push this concept of compromise being so important in our system. Because it always only works in one direction. That the people who say they want more stuff get it. And the people like me who says, well, there's no authority to do any of it. Well, how do I compromise? I don't compromise. There can be no compromise. I'm never going to compromise that, because as soon as I do, then I no longer have a position that's defensible. I'm in the realm of, well, we can do a little. We can do a little. It's just playing just a tip. As soon as you let that in, it's over.
Well, that's how we went from, say that was, I think, later 1800s case. And really in a very short amount of time, you end up in, it got pushed before then, but you ended up in a really short amount of time in 1932, 33, with the 1934 NFA getting passed.
With the what? I'm sorry?
The 1934 NFA getting passed.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, the thing is, there was no Supreme Court opinions in between for the most part. There's almost no Supreme Court opinions on the Second Amendment. There was basically nothing until kind of Crookshank, and then there was really nothing again until the so-called military application case. It's not like there's a lot of so-called case law on it. And then the Supreme Court very disingenuously in the case where they invented this military application, they talked about how it's well settled. Settled. They weren't well settled, and people also don't know that the defendant in that case, the people who they ruled against, they weren't even represented at the Supreme Court. They were not represented. They were bootlegger gangsters who won at the district court level, which they should have won, and the court was correct. And then they got an automatic appeal to the Supreme Court. They bypassed the federal appellate court and went straight to the Supreme Court, and their lawyers weren't getting paid. So they amp-scrayed and they didn't appear for any argument. So that case where they took our rights was argued by the United States government with nobody on the other side for the so-called citizens. And the Supreme Court still went ahead with this case that they dreamed this crap up.
Yeah.
This is how thoroughly corrupt the system is, and how the idea that the Supreme Court could ever take our rights in such a situation like that, when there's not even anybody left in the case to argue the other side of it, except the U.S. government, is ludicrous on its face. But that's because the details of all these things, the way these special rules happen, and their procedural rules, and the shifting burdens, and the substantive this and that, those things are all made up, and that's where all the power is. See, that's where all the power is. They talk about these rights, but then you lose them in these details with the procedure and the substance and what evidence is going to come in. And well, you missed a filing date on that, and you had a shifting burden this, and we got to have to assume that the federal government stuff we're going to give it the greatest deference. It's all these different things like that where it actually happens. That's where all the stuff actually happens, is down in those trenches and those details that nobody knows about except for lawyers, and the lawyers and media never tell people about.
I'll give you one that you might find actually kind of funny. Funny because it's sad, but so with different court cases that are going through district courts and circuit courts and stuff right now, especially some out of California, Rob Bonta is basically trying to push all sorts of stuff that's just insane, off the wall. By the time they get done, someone in California won't be able to own a spitball gun. But I was reading through some of this stuff. Now, I may not be a lawyer, but I'm decent at reading. I have a decent, grasp of the human language. And one of the things that they mentioned in Rob Bonta to show his proof for this historical gun control, because after the Bruin case came through, he mentions it's the 1783 Mass Act. And the first time I heard this described, they said it was about gunpowder. I thought, maybe a little strange. But when you read the 1783 Mass Act, it's talking about the different arms that people in that time owned. And it mentions cannons, mortars, bombs, hand grenades, all these different, your main military weapons of the time. And it was kind of a fire ordinance. But what they would do is they would bring you to court. You'd go in front of a jury, supposedly your peers. And if the government decided you were guilty, they confiscated your property. I think they might have actually compensated you for it. But then they turned around and sold these military arms right back to the civilian people.
Yeah. Nothing surprised me. I don't know if those details are true. Nothing would surprise me. They have private piracy is inside the Constitution.
Yeah.
I don't know what else people need to know. This is a criminal organization that they operate. That's all. That they'll send you out there as a pirate with a letter of marque, and you can just basically board ships, take their stuff, and you get a nice share of it. And the U.S. government gets their share.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, they're going to do anything they want. This is the thing. The system, the idea that they're going to stay within these rules when they're the only people keeping them within the rules is just ludicrous. The structure can never work. Nobody would agree to a structure like this in any other aspect of their life. Under any circumstance, you would never say, I'm going to put my wife or my ex-wife in charge of my assets, and she will have to check to make sure she stays within the bounds of this thing we've drawn up. And if she doesn't, well, then she has to make the determination of whether she has or hasn't. It's like, dude, that doesn't make any sense. You have no chance to defend yourself against that, and nobody would do it. But you say the word government, and people can't think straight. They imagine that it's this other thing. That's not just a bunch of men who running around, self-interested, trying to use the system. That's all it is. It's not anything else. And to imagine it is something else it's just very juvenile. It's very naive. It's infantile. And it's a fairyland that you should graduate from when you become an adult. It's just silliness.
That's there's a community around us. There's different guys that we all follow, different personalities that we all communicate with, and there's a anybody from people who are just into prepping to firearms, and all of these guys seem like they get it because they get it that the fight's rigged. You're in the ring with your arms tied behind your back. The other guy's wearing lead, mallets on his hands, and the referee is only going to see him doing the best things for the best interests. And the judges laying over on the side of the table over there, they're supposed to be hitting bells, but all they're doing is ringing cash registers. And it's just, I don't know, it gets so absurd, especially some people that I hear with some of this, like this pistol brace crap we've got going on now. And they can't believe these courts aren't just, tearing this ruling from the ATF apart. And it's like, have you not been watching these people?
Well, it's just so dumb. Again, it's a perfect example. Bump stocks, pistol grips.
They can just make
I understand. The ATF itself is totally unconstitutional agency. The whole thing is absurd. As soon as you're in there arguing about whether or not it's a good idea, and did they draft it the right way? Is it narrowly drawn? Does it serve a good purpose? You've lost. That will just get completely and totally defined away. And even if you have very clear language, like shall not be abridged,
these people will stretch any term.
Yeah. It's pointless. There's no point arguing about it. Instead, if you say
that's strong enough, easy enough language where, that should have been enough. And in initial cases, even in Miller, which was the original challenge to the 1934 NFA, when that went in front of the court, and you hear the court start talking about balancing interests and whether or not the sawed-off shotgun was useful in military service and all that,
it's moronic.
That's when you knew the fix was in right there.
Of course, because they created this. They created this
kingdom.
They create their own tests. Like I said, I've told people again and again, they create these tests out of thin air. 3-prong this and 4-prong that and shifting burden this. As soon as they do that, you're completely off in fairyland. And it's just something they've dreamed up. And even if you had very specific language inside of these 3-prong tests and 4-prong tests with a shifting burden, what does it mean for somebody to say that they believe that the government has met their burden with clear and convincing proof? Are you and I ever going to agree about that? No. Are you going to agree about that with someone who's a liberal who wants to do exactly what they think that finding that it's clear and convincing would allow them to do? Well, of course, then they're going to find it was clear and convincing. There's absolutely no reason they won't do that. And so as soon as you're off into those areas, it's over. And that's why I tell people that these cases, they aren't the law of the land. They only apply to the unfortunate parties who get stuck in front of these courts. That's it. That's all they apply to. They don't apply to anybody else. And the idea that the Supreme Court somehow speaks for the entire country and gives us the law and becomes the law of the land, there's no part of that's true. No part of that's true. And that's an absolute foundational piece of the con job that they use to control us with.
Well, that's, the original challenge to the 34 NFA was, of course, that short-barreled shotgun. They said it wasn't useful to military service. So you're telling me if he got caught with a fully locked and loaded belt-fed MG42, then that MG42 would have been useful to military service and the court would have upheld it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's an absurdity. This idea that it's this military application test. First of all, the sawed-off shotguns are used all the time by special forces people. They use them all the time when, depending on the kind of event they're going into. They're extremely useful inside a close area, like a trench. That'd be fantastic to have one of those riot guns they've got with the automatic shotgun that's sawed off. You could just clear the entire area out. What do you mean? It's a fantastic weapon for doing something like that. So if there was going to be all this distinction between, we were going to have to make all these absurd distinctions, there would have been a massive amount of discussion about it. But there is no discussion at all about any of these so-called distinctions with regards to the Second Amendment. And it's just idiotic because they make it up out of thin air like they do every single time. Doesn't matter if it's the Commerce Clause. It doesn't matter if it's general welfare. Doesn't matter if it's spending power authority. It doesn't matter if it's the First Amendment. It doesn't matter if it's the 14th Amendment. It doesn't matter. They use the same system every time. They make stuff up. They act like it's real. They create a 3-prong test or a 4-prong test, and then that's it. Then they start interpreting it, and then everyone acts like this is the constitutional law, and it's not. It's just something somebody said. That's all it is. It's just something somebody said, and the fact that they happen to sit on the court. Well, I'm sorry that the people in that case get screwed by those people. I tell people all the time, if you find yourself in court, you've already lost, and so that's just the way it goes. I'm sorry those people got screwed. There's no reason to double down and triple down and compound the problem and pretend like we're all bound. That's moronic.
It's definitely led to some really screwy positions to put people in, with the way the government can just change these terms, shift these terms, come up with, hey, the Commerce Clause, we can use that to do whatever we want. All the way down through the states, and the states have no defense against it.
Well, this is why I tell people that the idea we're going to get back to the Constitution, that the structures make sense, is nonsensical, because you can have any conversation you want. And the liberals, they don't claim to be outside the Constitution. They claim to be acting within the Constitution. Well, okay. Well, if they believe they're acting within the Constitution, and I believe they aren't, well, that just shows you that the Constitution has no actual meaning. And since it has no actual meaning, it can't have any actual binding authority on anybody, because nobody could have ever ratified it, because you can't agree to something that nobody knows what it means, and that it means something completely different to everybody, and that's going to be enforced in a way that there's no way to predict. That's not an agreement. It's not a legal agreement, and there's nothing in the law that would ever recognize that and call that a legal agreement. And so there you go. Whatever ratification vote occurred was completely and totally invalid. And in fact, I proved that with ChatGPT too. I proved it and got it to admit that. So it's not complicated.
Yeah.
The problem is that the people who are supposed to be on our side, who pretend to be on our side, which are constitutional conservatives who had me fooled for many, 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 many years, pretending to be for liberty and freedom and limited government, they've bought in and sold out with regards to all of these narratives, that as soon as you've sold out to those narratives, you can never win. You can never win. You'll always lose. And so they can run around and act shocked and surprised every time they lose again. And every time we lose more rights, and you hear about fundraising and jumping up and down and needing to send checks and getting the right kind of people in there and all this other nonsense they've been spewing forever, literally forever. I mean, I've done Spooner's letter to Grover Cleveland. It has the exact same language in his inauguration speech as the nonsense you'd see from Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anybody else. You had Abraham Lincoln's speech. He's just as full of crap in that speech as anyone else. They all say one thing and do another. It's not complicated. And Thomas Jefferson himself, when he was in the Senate and became president, that they took vote after vote after vote. And then he was the one who was sitting in there, and they actually screwed the vote up. And his so-called screw up, his so-called mistake on like vote 38, ended up giving him the presidency. What about that direct conflict of interest? Think how absurd that is. You had Samuel Chase sitting on the Supreme Court, sitting for legal tender laws. And he was the Secretary of Treasury under Lincoln, who'd been there passing these exact laws he's now sitting there in judgment of. Absurd conflict of interest, criminal conflicts of interest, where as a lawyer and a licensed lawyer in a state, if you had a conflict of interest that direct and you didn't disclose it and get waivers by everybody involved, you would lose your license. But instead, they become president, and they get on the $100,000 bill, and everybody talks about how fantastic they are, and the history books write it, and the foolish cons run around and praise them. It's just all moronic. Like I said, people don't understand the nature of government. If you don't understand the nature of government, you're going to fall for all their scams. If you understand the nature of government, then you're never going to fall for any of these scams. That's the bottom line. That's why they make sure nobody ever understands the true nature of government. They teach you a fairy tale about what government is and does, and that's just it. There's once that is set in people's minds, and they become identified with being a so-called patriot for holding these fantasy fairy views about what government is. Well, it's over, because the chance you're going to reach them until, maybe if they get really rung through the system, they might actually wake up. But most people, unless something really seriously bad happens, then personally, they never wake up from the dream that the Constitution is a freedom machine, and that the founders are the greatest people who ever walked the earth, and the Constitution is the most fantastic document ever written. They won't ever wake up from that, because because the brainwashing is literally 24/7 from the time you're born.
Yeah, it's like we've talked about. You know, if the Constitution, if there were sections that actually had teeth in them,
But there's no way to put
there
teeth
was
in
no
it.
way for them to go around that guardrail.
But there is no way to do that.
That's-
See, that's the problem. There is no way to put teeth into something like that. The people who want to know about it, they have to go read John Calhoun's Disquisition on Government. He explains exactly how the so-called checks and balances are supposed to work. But at the foundation, at the bottom of all of them, is that it has to be consensual. And that means the people in the states have to be able to leave voluntarily. That's it. They just have to say, look, we've tried. We're trying to work within the system. This system sucks. This is not what we agreed to. We're a permanent minority. We don't agree, and we're leaving. Okay, well, good luck to you. We're sorry, it didn't work out, and good luck. But that's not what happened. The South did that. They went down there and murdered them, blew all their crap up, burned them out, committed endless war crimes. And so
the last time someone tried to take them.
Yeah, they made it clear this is not consensual, but that's the foundational principle. And that's why the government, the insanity of the government has taken off since the Civil War, because once you can't leave, that's the actual check on the federal government getting out of hand. That's the actual check, the real check. The rest of it is just something that you kind of give lip service to. And you say, look, if you can get some men of integrity in there, great. They need to make the right decision. If they don't make the right decision, we're out of here. We're gone. That's it. And if you don't have that threat, if they don't have that threat, well, then they can just abuse you endlessly. And anybody can look around and see that that's exactly what's happening. And so if you want to argue about who your prison warden is, and both the wardens you get to vote for suck, how are you going to win? I don't understand. It's like, can you just say, well, you know what? I don't like either of these wardens. I'm leaving. No, you can't leave. You have to stay in. So that's the system they've set up. The actual system was supposed to be that you get to argue about it. And if you don't like it, well, you just leave. Well, but they take that off the table when they come down and kill you because you voted to leave. And once they did that, that was it. See, that's it. And that's why the system has gotten so completely and totally out of control, because the actual check on the federal government is the ability for the states to leave. That's it.
Yeah, that podcast, and if you guys look up the Quash, anywhere you find podcasts, that podcast that he was just talking about, you need to listen to that one, because he basically sets it out right there. Once states couldn't leave. Once we couldn't just cut the federal government off. Hey, we're going to step over here. We are our own state. We're supposed to be a separate entity any damn way. And we might draw up a treaty. We'll be able to deal with you guys, but we're going to do our own thing right now.
Right.
Once states weren't allowed to do that, and the federal government just went, hey, guess what? You can't leave. We're going to kill a whole lot of people, burn down half of the states down there, kill the economies down there, and then you still had to turn around and do what? Pay your dues to the federal government. Well,
that's right.
It's a little bit like playing your shower rapists.
Yeah. It's no longer. It's totally impossible to claim that you're in a voluntary union. That's all. It's not a voluntary union. And so if it's not a voluntary union, people need to be made aware of that this is not a voluntary union. But we're told all the time that what distinguishes us from these dictatorships and stuff that we fly around and bomb is that we are a voluntary union, and the people have the consent of the government and all this other nonsense. But it's just not true. And when the fact that it's not true, that's it. Then the authority of the government collapses. And that's why they can't be honest about it. See, that's why they can't be honest about it, because if you had an honest conversation and just said, look, I'm open to hearing it. How do you fight a war to hold a voluntary union together? How is that possible? Under what possible theory could that ever happen? And there is none. And so as soon as there is none, well, then now then there's absolutely no possibility that this is a voluntary union. And if it's not a voluntary union, then that means what the government is doing does not have the consent of the people. And if it doesn't have the consent of the people, it's just an open tyranny. You cannot get away from the logic once you go down the road, and that's it. So,
and they will stack up volumes upon volumes of texts and opinions to uphold every tyrannical damn thing that they do.
Of course. Yeah. They'll say stuff. They'll say anything they want. Why wouldn't they? They'll just make up anything they care to, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And so once you're in that situation, it's over. That's why I say, and I will let you know that I do have a hard break coming up. I've got to pick up a call, but I wanted to let you know that this is why I bring it up, that the constitutional conservatives, they have everybody arguing about things that are not important. They are wasting everybody's time because the fundamental issues are the ones that need to be addressed. And that is, how do you have a consensual government here? In what form or fashion is this consensual? And when it clearly is not consensual, because I can tell you right now, I don't consent. And lots of other people don't consent. Does it make any difference? No, I still have to do it. And so obviously it's not consensual because there's no part of the law, no type of law, not maritime law, not 1871, none of that. There's no law that any type of consent in order to be legally binding and valid must be both knowing and voluntary. It has to be both. It has to be knowing and voluntary. And the only way it can be voluntary to have any kind of consent is to have the ability to dissent and to have no impact. You can't threaten me with some kind of problem if I say no, thank you. I have to be free to go on my way. And there is no system in which to do that under the government. And so you don't even have to get into the fact that it's not knowing and they have all these secret rules. You can know that there's absolutely no consent because it's not voluntary. It's not voluntary. And to say I can leave is not a sufficient answer because it simply assumes away the entire issue, which is, why does the government have any validity to make me leave? Why can't I simply stay here to operate? Oh, well, you can leave. Well, you just assumed away the validity of the very issue we're talking about, is that the government purports to be a government of, by, and for the people that rests on their consent. But now when I tell you I don't consent, you just assume the issue that the government's valid and I'm the one who has to leave. Why doesn't the government just have to leave me alone? Why isn't that the answer? That's the flip side of that. But it doesn't. That's no part of it because we don't live in a country that has the consent of the people. It's that simple. And once you start seeing that, then you can see that everything else is built on that. And if you just push on that little weak point in the foundation over and over again, then all of their other frauds get exposed. And it's not a sufficient answer to say, well, we have to do something. We have to have some government. Well, you're welcome to come up with a system that the people can actually agree to. Yeah, that's it. And we're not going to have one until we actually have a system that people agree to. The Articles of Confederation worked fine. They worked completely fine. They were what the people chose. The Constitutional Convention was a scam, and the Constitution itself was a scam. And nobody would agree to the system we have now. Nobody would agree to it, except the insiders who know they can use the system to abuse the people. Those people would agree. And who was it that wrote it? Who was it? The insiders who get to abuse the people. They wrote it and they rigged up the ratification vote because it benefits them. But nobody else would agree to this insane system unless you think you can use it to take money from other people and put it in your own pocket. That's it. Those are the only people who are doing. The people who are putting the money in and having it taken, they would never agree to this system. But that's what we're told is consent. It's truly moronic.
It's the way everything has become so structured. I mean, you're 100% right.
Yeah, that's it.
But let me ask the question of the day, though, legal man. Okay. What can we do?
Yes, always the question, right? It's always, what can we do? And honestly, what we're probably going to do is just bend over and get screwed. But what we theoretically could do is jury nullification. If people understood their rights under jury nullification, that's why I spent almost 30 episodes doing Spooner's essay and explaining it. And I've explained it in many other episodes as well. If people understood that right, then we could stop it. Because with that one thing, you only need 5 to 10% of the population. You don't have to get it across the entire United States. I don't have to convince 5 or 10% of the jokers in California. I don't have to convince the idiots up there in New York City. I don't have to convince 10% of the people living in Chicago. I don't have to convince any of them. You only have to convince the people in your area. That's it. You only have to convince the people in your area. And if you can convince the people in your area, 10% of them, and educate them with regards to jury nullification, then you can stop it. That's it. Because all of their laws become in effect dead letter because they can't get convictions. Yeah. And if you can't get convictions, then it doesn't work. And the entire purpose of having things go to a jury is to make sure that the government can't just write down anything it wants and abuse people and then abuse minorities. Because the way you actually get a vote is not at the time of this made up crap every couple of years in November. The time is if you sit in the jury box and you say not guilty. That's the vote that counts. See, that's the vote that actually matters. That's when you actually send the message to the state that says, no, that doesn't go around here. I don't do it. And the fact that 11 other people think it should go around here, well, that doesn't make any difference. you don't get a conviction. You have a hung jury. Good luck to them. If you've got 10%, you always have somebody on the jury that just says not guilty. You're never going to get a conviction. So it doesn't matter. You can't get a not guilty. It doesn't matter. You can't get a conviction. If you can't get a conviction, then the people are free to actually do what they believe is correct. You're free to ignore the so-called laws if the juries are not going to convict. And that's why the state doesn't like it, because it puts the power in the people as opposed to in the corrupt officials in the states. That's it. That's the entire reason. That's why your right to a jury trial is there. The Supreme Court used to know that. It issued the opinion. In fact, I did a whole episode on that ridiculous case that the Supreme Court gave, where ultimately what it holds is that, of course, you have a right to jury nullification, and the jury has a right to judge both the law and the facts in any case. However, the jury has absolutely no right to know that. Well, if it doesn't have a right to know it, and now the appellate courts have all been instructed that they aren't going to tell them, well, what the hell good is that? It makes no damn sense. It's the only right there is that you don't have a right to know about it. Think how absurd that is. This is the same kangaroo court that requires that you be read your rights when you're arrested. These phony baloney rights, right? You have a right to a jury trial, but your jury doesn't have a right to know anything about what it's doing when it gives you a jury trial. Why don't they put that in the damn rights that you're supposed to get read?
They're only going to get their instructions basically from the prosecutors, the DAs, and they're going to write those instructions out.
No, the courts. The court and the prosecutor and the defendant, but they have pattern jury charges. It's have the vast majority of cases, they have what's called pattern jury charges in every state and at the federal level. These are so-called approved statements that have been instructions that have been approved normally by the Supreme Court in your state to be given in such a case. And they have definitions, instructions. They have all these different things in there. And yeah, you can argue about a little bit that's in there, but the stuff is so laughably pro-state, it's absurd. This is why they get these 98% conviction rates, because it's just a shakedown routine. You know, the prosecutors don't risk anything and the defendant risks everything. And so, you know, systems like that, again, they can never, ever work. See, they can never, ever work. It's not a matter of getting the right people. The system is structurally set up to do what you see, which is to abuse us. It's just no way around it.
It's a crazy, once you really start to pay attention to it and you really start to look at it, man.
Yeah, once you actually see it, once you see the real problem, you can never be fooled again. I tell the people about that all the time. That look, once you really understand what I've taught people, if you really understand the way the structure works, then you'll never be fooled by any of their systems again. And that's it. You'll know what government is, and you'll know every time they come up, you can spot them a mile away. Government scammer, laying a load of crap on me. No, thank you. And that's it. But until you understand that, then you can get taken in by these endless amounts of scams. They come up with some new version each time, every couple of years, with a new candidate who's going to fix this and a new sort of thing that they're going to correct this and get the right law of that and make sure it never happens again. It's just all this nonsense. It's just all made up nonsense.
It's definitely eye opening when you actually start watching it.
Oh yeah.
And that's part of, I guess, another eye-opening thing for me was, I do watch a lot of congressional hearings, and I listen to a lot of any kind of oral arguments and interesting cases I try to listen to. And the sheer absurdity of the arguments and the slogans and everything that I hear, especially from these people for the state, it's always the state power that's,
of course. You saw that. You played that little clip. I mean, just look what a bunch of jokers those are. Who would ever voluntarily agree that I'm going to do anything those guys agree to? That's asinine. I don't believe any of those guys. You guys are just jokes, complete jokes. I wouldn't trust them to watch my cats. I'm not about to give them this so-called authority they claim to have over me. It's asinine. But again, that's a fundamental issue that's never discussed. And I didn't even touch on all the problems with representative government. And it's been watered down, the way the votes make no sense and they have no obligation to do anything. There's so many problems with it that never get discussed that it's not fixable, like I said, unless you can get some people to understand jury nullification by some time. But people don't give a crap. That's the bottom line. People just, for the most part, don't give a crap. And they've got the mentality of slaves. And, we live among a group of people who basically feel like slaves. And, when you're in that situation, there's not much you can do. If you were if you turned 18 in 1914 and you were in France and you were a man, what chance do you have? You're going to get drafted. You're going to get sent to those front lines. And what are you going to do? You're going to run? Well, they'll just shoot you. Your own sergeant will shoot you.
Yeah.
You're going to try to cause an uprising. It's not going to work, dude. You're going to get caught. You're going to get shot, or you're going to get court-martialed and hung. Or you can go over the trench when they blow the whistle and get mowed down, or try your best to try to hide behind the different shit and try to jump in a hole or something and just try to survive. That's it. But you can't stop it. Can I stop all these idiots everywhere? No. Can I stop all the brainwashing going on? No, I can't do anything about it. I can basically spit into the ocean, which is all I do to try to make an effect. And I do it strictly because I think people deserve to know the truth.
Yeah.
Individually, because some individuals actually care. And I think the truth matters. But how much longer I'll do it, I have no idea. I can tell you after 3 years, I've pretty much had my fill. And I've pretty much determined that actually making a difference with people is basically impossible. And how much more I'm willing to stick my neck out, try to help people, I don't know. It's one day I'm likely just to disappear. That's what I can tell you.
It's a definite question, and there's a lot of guys that talk about stuff like me, like you do. Some other guys that a lot of us around the chats follow, and it's a point everybody's kind of getting to in a lot of cases where it's like, you know, the easiest thing would just be shut up and then meld into the background.
It doesn't help me though. See, because I mean, they already know me. It's not going to matter. I took the chances. I told people the truth. They already know me. It's not going to matter. But they also know that I made it clear that I don't care. I'm not trying to do anything I'm not allowed to do. And I'm always for sale. If the powers that be want to come up and bribe me and tell me to pay me off to get off, I'll get off the air. I don't give a crap about that. I don't care. I'm not going to get killed and throw myself in front of a freight train for a bunch of people who obviously don't give a crap and aren't going to do anything. I'm not going to. But you know, I have my relative integrity in place because I have told people the truth. But like I said, how much longer? I don't have any obligation to tell people the truth for even one more day. And so what's going to happen is one day they're going to see that this quash is no longer being released on Sundays. That's it. That's what'll happen. And that could happen at any time because, like I said, I've done it for a very long time. I've made a lot of shows, hundreds and hundreds of shows explaining just a fantastic amount of stuff to people. And I look at the result, and the result is that, you know, it's spitting into the ocean. That's what it is. And the vast majority of unwashed idiots just overwhelm me. 330 million people. How many people you think in this country actually get it?
Oh,
How many
man.
people?
You'd be hard pressed to get 200,000.
I think it's more than that. I would give it more than that. I think you probably got. I think you probably have 10 million people spread across. That's still only like 3%.
Yeah, that's
3% of the population. You get 10 million people. Okay, that's a lot of people. If I try to put them into a room, right? If we all could go over and create Quashville and go live in it, it'd kick ass. Where we'd have 10 million people that were all on board. That'd be great. But they're all spread out. The vast majority of them are often not even online. You're never going to run into them. You're never going to hear about it. They keep their mouth shut. They've never done anything. Okay. So that's it. So how many people know about it who speak up? That's a very small number. You know, that's a very small number. And we're all spread out. And the likelihood that anything's going to happen and that anyone's going to catch on is very, very low. I think it helps for sanity to be around people who get it. I'm on Twitter and I do my show still currently, mostly because, like I said, I think people deserve to know the truth, and I enjoy laughing at the absolute absurdity of the whole thing. I'm insulted by how stupid it is that they expect me to believe this crap. You know, it's absurd to me. It's just an insult to my intelligence. Like, I get it. Before the internet, it's hard because unless you had somebody who kind of gave you some books and stuff, there was no way to find. You can't get into your public library and figure this crap out. That's not going to happen. And so prior to the internet, I get it. But when we had the damn internet for 25 years, guys, what the hell? Go figure it out. Go catch on. I mean, it's not that complicated to figure out, but it's obvious to me that most people don't care. So
most people can tell you their favorite sports team and all their stats and all that.
Oh, of course.
And they have no idea that they're just getting bent over and boned
Still the greatest country in the world. Why don't you move to Somalia? Just idiots. And so there's complete idiots. And like I said, to me, it's an insult to my intelligence that they expect me to believe this shit. If the bad guys had approached me 25, 30 years ago, I'm sure I would have been one. I'd have been swung over. And I suspect I've probably done that many times in many lives. I've been a scammer working for government, scamming the people because I can just see it so clearly and have for so long. But they didn't come to me, so they didn't make it worth my time. So I took the brunt of all their crap because when you're on the outside, you get crapped on. That's it. Yeah. That's the reality. And if you're not on the outside, then you can stumble into good situations if you happen to be doing something that they want people to be doing, but you're very precarious. Because as soon as whatever you're doing is no longer needed, then they'll just discard you and you won't be able to figure it out. You'll think your own genius and brilliance and hard work is what created it all. It's just a fantasy. They can just at any time, you can just flick you away like a bug. And the only reason that doesn't happen to anybody and everybody is because if they did that, then the curtain would be pulled back. And then everybody would see it for what it was. And so they don't do it to that many people. And people like me provide a useful service to them because I provide an illusion that there's freedom of speech and that people could catch on. When in reality, they know damn well they keep me in basically a soundproof box. And that's okay. I get it. Those are the games. That's the rules. I don't run around and claim that I'm going to do anything with that. I get it. Those are the rules. But I'll speak to the little teeny tiny group of people who hear the show, and I'll tell them the truth. And if they can handle it, great. And if they can't, which a lot of people can't, I just block them because I don't want to hear their idiocy. And I get sick of it, quite frankly. I probably have blocked more people than almost any other account on Twitter during the time I've been on there.
There comes a time, and you don't have to talk to someone very long to figure out just how far gone they are.
Oh, yeah. It takes me like 30 seconds. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. And I just keep my mouth shut. I don't have to tell anybody. So,
yeah, it's amazing how quick someone will tell you who they are.
Oh, yeah. Well, I hate to do it, but I am up against a hard break here.
Yes, sir, brother. I so appreciate you coming on the show, man. And maybe we can get back and do another one just to shoot the breeze and do it again sometime. But man, I seriously appreciate it. If I'm still doing shows for the public, I always just hit me up. Yeah. And any of you guys out in the chat, you'll hear this again. Follow Legal Man on Twitter if you can survive that nightmare. And follow his podcast. Go to Google Podcasts, wherever, and look up the Quash. It's going to be a hell of an eye-opening education. I promise you that. Yes, it will. All right. Well, thank you so much, brother. Go ahead and take your break. And okay. I appreciate your time, brother. Take care. Thank you. All right. Thanks, man. All right, guys, that was the Quash. If you don't want to wake up, don't go listen to this podcast. You guys have already heard us talk plenty of times how this government stacks things against us and they can pretty well do whatever they want. And he brings receipts on that. His podcast was my introduction to Spooner, someone I've got to do a bunch more reading about. And that is just insanely valuable. But he's right about one thing. Think about if we had some juries, if we had people woke up to this scam that gun control is. And then when Matt and them went to court down in Florida, they had a jury that went, nah, we're not convicted. Think about that, how that would throw the brakes on it. Yeah, Chamber, he is an outrageously smart dude, to say the least. It is very refreshing to hear the truth, but it can be damn sure frustrating. Especially when you hear someone and they're actually going into that truth, and then you start to see everything as it is. Not the way you've been told, but the way that it is. It can be one of those things. Hell, like last night, man. Last night was just nothing but frustration. Because look at the stupid crap, pistol braces, and we're going to throw people in jail. 10 years in prison if you've got this little fucking piece of plastic that doesn't mean shit. So, anyway, I'm going to end this one. I'm going to end this stream here because I want to keep that legal man into this stream. But I'm thinking if you guys want, we might crank one up. Give me about 20 minutes, say 8:30 or so. We might crank one up and actually watch another one of these clown show fucking hearings with some FBI whistleblowers, and then we'll get into just how much more your government is bending you over, boning you, spying on you, and stealing your shit, and then throws you in jail. Oh, Minute Man. Oh, God, I hope it does get better. I hope it gets better before my kids get too much older, but I don't see it happening anytime soon, brother. So I tell you what, guys, like I said, I'm going to end this one here, and then I'll crank another one up here in a little bit, and then we'll listen to some FBI whistleblowers in case you guys missed that little slice of theaterish hell. As always, man, you guys be cool. You perps be cool. Keep them things on you at all times. God knows your government hates you, and all they want to use you for is their own little adventures. So y'all be cool. I'm out.